everybody's kind of crazy excited, getting frenzied over what's going to happen, and your soldier coming home real soon. And just know that you are at a bit of an artificial high. That's okay. It is what it is. That's how we're supposed to be after 15 months away and getting back together again.
Sir, I'm here. You alright? Calm down. I'm sorry. Calm down. Calm down, alright? Calm down. Quit crying.
Just know that's where we are right now. That's where we'll be for a little bit, but then we'll come off that and life will begin to move from the fantasy and the daydream ideals that we've been having and bend more back toward the reality. And the best thing you can do is just know that you're in that cycle, that you can see it coming so that you can begin to talk that out. What your ideals that you're throwing around in your head, your soldier's got many of those same things going as he's sitting on his rucksack over there after he's packed out, Connex is closed, banded, and they're ready to go. And he's just dreaming about that reunion and coming back. With probably a good time so that we can engage in expectation management and begin to try and bring some of those expectations in sync there. You can anticipate from the time the plane touches down and you see it land, it's waiting out there on the tarmac, probably about 3 hours plus or minus from that time, you're going to be totally released and moving down the All-American Freeway or wherever to get to whatever you want to do at that point. Kind of about 3 hours from touchdown. So it's like kind of an hour down there at Green Ramp. You'll come back. By the time you transit, it'll be an hour and a half. You'll spend maybe an hour waiting around the unit area, and then you're getting ready to, grab his gear. They have to, all the other gear that they brought that has to be brought from the belly of the aircraft, it's dumped back in the unit area, and that's the last thing you'll be doing. Your soldier will be grabbing up that gear, and you guys will be going. So about 3 hours, start to finish, in terms of wheels down to getting out of Dodge. Bringing your best self there, obviously, I think we're all committed to that on that day we just make a decision. Nothing's going to rattle me. Nothing's going to ruffle my feathers. I'm going to bring my best self to Green Ramp. Soldiers are trying to coach them, obviously do the same thing, especially if that first window, just be the best you can for each other. You deserve that. Each of you deserve to see your best on the day that you've waited so long for. So if the kids are going ape crazy and somebody spills orange Kool-Aid down your white blouse, before you're going, roll with the punches and just make a choice. You know what? Not going to faze me today because I'm just bringing my best self, and we're going to have a great reunion because we're together. That's what it's all about. So making those sort of choices be a helpful thing. On the reunion day, too, what you can expect maybe from your soldiers' end, we talked about both high excitement, but it could be also high exhaustion, just due to their travel schedule, how long they've been up. Could be for you, too, depending on what preparations you made. And I would just encourage you, don't do that to yourself if you can avoid it. If you know you're tracking plenty of sleep, go to bed early, keep routines, don't get too wild and frenetic for your kids' sake if you have children, things like that, just so you're rested and excited as opposed to exhausted and excited. He's not going to have much of a choice. It's kind of brutal the path they're on.
What's a realistic expectation for when you go home? How is that change going to happen? I mean, there's part of me that thinks in my head, man, I am going to go back home. And I said this in a sermon on Sunday, but you're gonna walk through the door of that armory and you're gonna step out into the promised land. I mean, I'm gonna go home to Red Wing, and the streets are gonna be paved with gold, and the hills will be flowing with milk and honey. I'm gonna have a fat bank account. I'm gonna have all this leisure time. Life is gonna be sweet. I'm gonna enjoy every day of my job. My wife is always gonna be in the mood, if you know what I mean, and it will never be Groundhog Day again. Which is great to think about. But you know what? What is a realistic expectation? Probably Red Wing, Minnesota is not going to have streets paved with gold when I get home. And my fat bank account probably won't last forever. And there will probably be days on the job when I get home when it is going to be less than fulfilling. So keep those expectations realistic about that change. If you are expecting a non-stop party for the rest of your life when you get home, you probably need to think about, is that really realistic? Yes, there'll be some parties, but there'll be some challenges for when you get home too. This slide here tells you why we do what we do in this warrior transition. And again, this is one step toward going home. I just want to remind you, this is not the end of it, but this is one step, and this is an important first step. PDHA's Post-Deployment Health Assessment. You'll be filling out one in a couple days here. You also fill out one when you get back home. This is from post-deployment health assessments that were filled out during these dates by soldiers who were 90 days out of Iraq. This is at their 90-day mark from being home. So these guys have been home for 3 months out of OIF during this time, 1st of August 05 through the 26th of April 06. RCNG is Reserve Component National Guard, AD is active duty. 42% of the people filling out this health assessment, where they fill out a whole bunch of questions about their physical health and their mental health and everything else. 42%, 4 out of 10 soldiers, 3 months after being home, said they were having mental health problems. What do you think about that number?
Wow. High.
And then, you know,
It's high?
the worst part about that, they went over there 22 months. They haven't been over
Right,
22 months.
right. There's nobody in this group that was gone from their families 22 months, over here 16. You're absolutely right about that. 4 out of 10. Anybody surprised by that number?
You're gonna see a lot higher number.
Yeah?
Figured it'd be higher.
I'm not in any way telling you that every one of you is going to go home and 3 months after being home is going to have mental health problems. You might. There's a significant number of you who will have some sort of issues. Not all of you will, though. The final thing I want to tell you about each one of these issues here, not one of these is like a fatal cancer. Not one of these is incurable. There is something we can do about every one of these things.
Main thing I want to point out is warrior stress is absolutely normal. That's what happens when guys go do, when soldiers go do what soldiers do in combat. That's what you get, is combat stress. 15 months Callahan, 15 months forward, you will get that by doing the warrior thing there. That does not mean that you are impaired. That does not mean you're abnormal. It's just the opposite. That's what happens when you go to those places. So if these sorts of things are happening, trouble sleeping, nightmares, flashbacks, whatever, hey, that's occupational hazard. That goes with the territory for doing the things we've done. And the main thing I want you to remember is that is not PTSD. These things are not PTSD. That's combat stress, warrior stress, that is a normal response to an abnormal situation. It's an ordinary response to extraordinary events they've been exposed to. And a lot of us will have some of those issues we work out, from steering clear of barbecues and things like that for a bit, to loud sounds and noises, the IED threat that everybody's lived with that's been there, and all sorts of other little things that may impact us in some ways there. Good news is combat stress, warrior stress, that will lessen over time. As weeks become months, that'll begin to dissipate. We don't get over it, but we do get through it, right? Like we talked about before. And that can happen. Now that differs from, next thing we'll talk about, which is PTSD. PTSD is that warrior stress on steroids. That is amped up. And PTSD starts much later. PTSD starts typically 3 to 6 months after the trauma. Not necessarily after deployment, but after the trauma. And the difference between combat stress and PTSD is combat stress becomes PTSD when it begins to interfere with your life. When your life begins to unravel because of these symptoms that have gotten very severe. For Hawkins, it would look like maybe you see me cussing somebody out in the parking lot of the brigade headquarters. I mean, that's not something you typically see the chaplain doing, what's going on there. I begin to abuse my children and get violent with them, not something, I've been inclined toward. I start drinking and missing command and staffs, or they smell alcohol on my breath at chapel on Sunday. And like, what's going on with that? Very out of character, very out of bounds, very out of the norm for folks. And essentially, my relationship, I start beating Lori or something like that. My relationship is threatened. My career is threatened. My competency is threatened. That's when you're getting in this range of PTSD issues. That's a very small percentage of our soldiers who will undergo anything like that. And I'll tell you who it will most likely be and how you can most likely guard against that. If you want to take a pill, if you want to take an antidote, inoculate your soldier against PTSD, the best thing you can do, and you're helping him right here, is to have a great relationship. The inoculation against PTSD are quality relationships in 3 dimensions we're learning. With the war going on longer, we're learning more all the time. Relationships, relationship. Number one, spiritually, we tend to find folks that have a spiritual dimension in relationship tend to do better with PTSD. The second thing would be not only that, folks who have a quality spouse or parent. Those are the two most important relationships. Siblings, not as critical, but if you got a great relationship with your spouse and or a great relationship with parents, that's another inoculation against PTSD. They tend to do better. And the third thing is soldiers that have comrades. They're connected with other friends. They're close with other soldiers. That dimension of faith, the dimension of family, the dimension of friends. You've got great relationships that tends to inoculate you against having many issues with PTSD.